warm welcome to the program. I'm Akaite Afia here in Lagos. The World Health Organization says it is in discussion with Russian health authorities on the process for possible pre-qualification for its newly approved COVID-19 vaccine. The Russian president had earlier today announced Russia has become the first country in the world to grant regulatory approval to a COVID-19 vaccine after less than 2 months of human testing, a move hailed by Moscow as evidence of its scientific prowess.
Say that we are in a close contact with the Russian health authorities and discussions are ongoing with respect to possible WHO pre-qualification of the vaccine. But again, pre-qualification of any vaccine includes the rigorous review and assessment of all required safety and efficacy data. And we are encouraged by the speed by which several candidate vaccines have been developing. And as we have been always saying, we hope that some of these vaccines will prove to be safe and efficient, and that through this mechanism that I just talked about, we will be able to get doses that will be then distributed in an equal way, and maybe to look into how this distribution would go, what would be some prioritization, and similar things. Thank you.
Russia has hailed its fast-tracked COVID-19 vaccine as a Sputnik moment. It began the first clinical trials in June this year, just months after teams in China, the US, and Europe. As we said earlier, the WHO has not ruled out this vaccine, but wants to work with Russia to make sure it receives the qualification it needs. Here's the global update.
Russia, which has nearly 900,000 coronavirus cases, says it has developed the first vaccine offering sustainable immunity against the virus. President Vladimir Putin says the country's health ministry has given regulatory approval for the vaccine after less than 2 months of human testing. He adds that one of his daughters had used the vaccine and that she was fine after having had an increase in temperature. The health minister says trials of the vaccine would continue, involving thousands of people. The news comes as the number of COVID-19 cases around the world surpasses the 20 million mark, with 736,000 deaths. More than 5 million of those cases are in the United States, with 3 million in Brazil. India has the world's third largest caseload of the coronavirus, with over 2.2 million. The country took just 20 days to go from 1 million to 2 million cases. Meanwhile, Pranab Mukherjee, who served as the president of India from 2012 to 2017, is in critical care and on a ventilator 1 day after he confirmed that he had tested positive for COVID-19. The 84-year-old was in hospital for a surgical procedure to remove a blood clot from his brain when he discovered he had the virus.
After 102 days, we have our first cases of COVID-19 outside of a managed isolation or quarantine facility in New Zealand.
In other developments, New Zealand has detected its first locally transmitted coronavirus cases in more than 100 days. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said 4 people tested positive from the same household. The source of the infections is not yet known. And finally, US President Donald Trump is reportedly considering a measure to block US citizens and permanent residents from returning home if they are suspected of being infected with the coronavirus.
The Russian vaccine is all the rave right now when it comes to vaccines against the coronavirus. The Russian president, probably trying to convince the rest of the world the vaccine is safe for use, says one of his daughters received the vaccine and is doing well. President Putin hardly mentions his daughters and usually carefully guards his family's privacy, refusing to give details about the lives of his daughters or even confirming media reports that their names are Maria Vorontsova and Katerina Tikhanova. During television remarks announcing that the vaccine has been registered, he said, "The vaccine creates a stable antibody and cellular immunity, and I know this very well because one of my daughters had such an injection." According to him, after her first injection, her temperature went up to 38 degrees Celsius before falling to 37 degrees Celsius, and that after her second injection, her temperature also rose slightly, but then went away. While the rest of the world might be weary of the vaccine in Russia, the Philippine president, Rodrigo Duterte, has lauded the country's efforts to develop a vaccine. President Rodrigo Duterte says he is willing to participate in trials. He also says that when the vaccine arrives, that he offered himself an aguine pig when the vaccine does come to them. During an address to the nation, President Duterte said he will tell President Putin that he has huge trust in his studies in combating COVID-19, and he believes the vaccine produced is really good for humanity. The main challenger in the presidential election in Belarus, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, denies she was forced to leave the country, contradicting comments from her campaign team and saying the decision to leave had been very difficult. News reports earlier today said she had joined her children in neighboring Lithuania after 2 nights of clashes following the contested re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko. The 37-year-old emerged from obscurity a few weeks ago to mount the biggest challenge in years to Lukashenko's rule, standing for election after her blogger husband was jailed. There had been concerns about her whereabouts after her campaign team said they had been unable to reach her by phone for hours after she was known to have left a meeting with Central Election Commission officials. At least one person died as police clashed with protesters on Monday after the opposition accused Lukashenko of rigging the vote amid widespread criticism from Western leaders. Foreign Minister Linas Livechius has spoken about Ms. Tikhanovskaya's situation, saying that she is safe in Lithuania and that she had to leave the country. He also said EU sanctions are possible against Belarus officials who use force against peaceful protesters.
To submit complaint about counts of the votes, and she stayed for a very long time. Lawyer left the building, but she stayed longer, and it lasted around 7 hours totally. So we didn't know where she is and what she's doing. And then I informed that I cannot reach and cannot find. So it was all night was kind of tension. Then I understand that she had not so many options, just to leave the country. She had our national visa, and it was her decision to leave to Lithuania. So authorities didn't prevent this from happening. And in the night time, already in the morning hours, she arrived in Lithuania. So she's in Lithuania. She's safe.
Well, 1 week after the horrific explosion that ripped through the Lebanese capital, Beirut, people have been attending a vigil for the more than 200 victims. A while ago, a crowd stood in silence near the ruins of the city's port as a Muslim call to prayer was broadcast and church bells tolled. 6:09 local time, that was the exact time when 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate stored unsafely in a port warehouse detonated. Outrage has grown that so much hazardous material was kept there. The Lebanese government's resignation on Monday failed to pacify protesters who clashed with the police in central Beirut for a third consecutive night. Lebanon was already struggling with an unprecedented economic crisis before the disaster, with families pushed into poverty and hunger. Since October, protesters have been demanding the complete overhaul of the political system, while they blame for government corruption and mismanagement.
بلحظات كنت أنا عم بطلع بالسيارة تراجعت لورا زتني الانفجار. بس راحت سيارتنا.
Well, moving back to the situation in Belarus, postdoctoral researcher at the Computational Propaganda Project at the University of Oxford, Alexander Hermeshimimenka, joins us now from the Minsk area. Alexander, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Hi.
Hi. So tell us, what is the tension like in the country following the political events in the last 4 days or so, which have escalated really quickly?
Yeah, so in Belarus we have largest process since independence, and they are all going on for 3 or 4 days since the day of presidential elections that been described as rigged and stolen by the current government that supposedly didn't reveal the true results. So many people are unhappy and they're protesting across the country. More than 30 cities and towns across the country are involved in this largest movement since independence.
Yes, and while Ms. Tikhanovskaya says she had to go see her children in the neighboring Lithuania, has she ruined her chances of returning to the country, seeing as things are really heating up right now and the government is clamping down on the protest?
Well, indeed, Tikhanovskaya was the key candidate during this election from opposition, and according to some calculations, she might have won these elections, but it seems like government and police pressed her, and she had to leave the country, unfortunately. And it doesn't really mean that she's out of political process in Belarus. What's happening now is widespread protest that she didn't take part in. So it's not up to her, really. But it's up to people now. And many people hope that she might return at some moment in the future, maybe as a president.
Well, I mean, amid these protests, I'm just going to ask you to paint a picture for us. How could the president survive this turmoil and restore peace in Belarus?
Well, he uses all types of forces and police force and military force against peaceful protesters, unfortunately. And it seems like the violence is escalating across the streets of many towns, and there are reports that prisons are full now. There are no space for new people to be detained so they get just beaten by the police, which means that the current president tries every type of force to stop transition of power, not to lose power, and it means that we're entering a very difficult situation for this country. And we don't really know how it happened. But definitely the president, he hopes to prevent process from further escalation, but it doesn't look this method that was successful over the last 25 years of his authoritarian rule. It doesn't look it is successful now. It doesn't really bring him any good result at the moment.
Well, we will be keeping our eye on the situation there. And Alexander, thanks again for speaking to us. Please stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, still ahead on The World Today. We see the 3D reconstruction of face of Renaissance art master Raphael. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. Well, we spoke a little bit earlier about the Russia vaccine and how it's all the rave right now. And we have public health physician and sustainable development consultant and researcher, Dr. Laz Eze, on the telephone in transit within the country. Dr. Eze, thanks for joining us.
Russia that it has found a vaccine for COVID-19 that is yet to go through phase 3 of clinical trials of having sufficient scientific evidence that this vaccine could be used on a wider population. I kind of find it interesting. I read a couple of media reports around it and what President Putin announced that this vaccine is going to be used in Russia. You know what, Amarachi, for the COVID-19 is a huge global problem, and I can understand the haste to find solutions, especially vaccines, given the rising number of cases as well as the rising number of deaths around the world. So it's very understandable when leaders, policymakers are frustrated genuinely and they are looking for solutions to solve this challenge.
And would you recommend the test on humans, even though this emerging 2 months earlier than scheduled?
Vaccine candidates are tested on humans, and when it's found to be very effective, then that's the time you can get approval for it to be used widely. For every vaccine that we use today, it went through that process, and COVID-19 cannot be any different. At the University of Nigeria Center for Clinical Trials, this is one of the things that we promote, that any drug or vaccine that is undergoing development, and is something to be used in Nigeria. You should also do clinical trials in Nigeria. And before you go to the phase 3 that involves many more persons, it must have demonstrated some level of efficacy in phase 1 and phase 2. And based on the findings, we know whether these vaccines is usable here. COVID-19 is a global problem, and we need global solution. Part of those global solution is vaccine development. So we must be part of that solution.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Eze, for joining us today. In other developments, Taiwan faces an increasingly difficult position as China pressures the democratic island to accept conditions that would turn it into the next Hong Kong. The comment was made by the U.S. Health Secretary Alex Azar. China has proposed a one-country, two-systems model of autonomy to get Taiwan to accept its rule, much as it used in Hong Kong. The proposal has been rejected in Taiwan by all major parties and the government. Wu said Taiwan was lucky to have friends like Azar in the United States to help fight for Taiwan's international space. Azar arrived in Taiwan on Sunday, August 9th, as the highest-level U.S. official to visit in 4 decades, a trip condemned by China, which claims the island as its own.
I've made that point repeatedly. Our life has become increasingly difficult as China continues to pressure Taiwan into accepting its political conditions that will turn Taiwan into the next Hong Kong. However, we are fortunate to have good friends like the U.S. and its enthusiastic members, like Secretary Azar, who was always there supporting each and every fight of Taiwan for international space. From media.
The British Immigration Minister, Chris Phillips, says Britain and France will work at a pace to finalize a new plan for shutting down a migrant route across the Channel. He said the French President, Emmanuel Macron's government, agreed the high numbers making the illegal crossing were unacceptable.
Not going to wait until... We had a very constructive meeting with our French colleagues in Paris this morning. We have reaffirmed our unshakable shared commitment to making sure this route of crossing the Channel is made unviable. It is facilitated by ruthless criminal gangs, it puts lives at risk, and it is totally unnecessary. We have worked on a joint operational plan, a new operational plan, with the objective in mind of completely cutting this route, and we're going to be working at pace in the coming days to make that plan a reality. Our newly appointed clandestine Channel threat commander, Dan Omani, with me today, will be returning to France early next week to continue those discussions. I'm also delighted that the French made a commitment to appoint their own commander to take responsibility in this area, which is a very important step forward.
Well, that was British Immigration Minister Chris Phillips. And now moving on to the Renaissance master Raphael, who probably did not like his nose. So the painter who sought perfection in everything may have done a nose job in his self-portrait and other works where he inserted himself among other people. That's the conclusion of Rome University scientists who produced a 3D computer reconstruction of his face from a plaster cast of his presumed skull made in 1833, when remains believed to be his were last exhumed. Raphael died in Rome in 1520 at the age of 37, most likely from pneumonia, but perhaps from syphilis, and was buried in Rome's Pantheon as he desired. His famous self-portrait was done about 15 years earlier when he was in his early 20s and clean-shaven. The reconstruction is one of the ways he may have looked closer to his death when he was sporting a beard. Raphael died in Rome at the age of 37, and In his famous self-portrait, which was done about 15 years earlier, he was in his early 20s and clean-shaven. Now, the reconstruction is something that's a little bit closer to the way he looked in his death. Well, thank you so much for joining us on The World Today. I'm Akaite Afia. Stay safe.